Failure is the experience most people spend their lives running from, yet it's the only thing that forces us to meet ourselves honestly. It strips away illusion, status, and comfort. It dismantles the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. That's what makes it a privilege, not in the glamorous sense of opportunity, but in the raw, painful access it grants to truth. Success can inflate you, but failure reveals you. When everything is going well, you can hide behind outcomes. You can measure your worth through validation, attention, or achievement. But when it all collapses, when the approval fades or the plan backfires, you're left with the uncomfortable question, who am I when nothing's working? Most people avoid that confrontation. Failure forces it. The privilege of failure lies in what it exposes. It shows you the gap between your image and your reality, between what you believe about yourself and what you can actually handle. It humbles you, not by humiliation, but by clarity. You realize how much of your identity was built on external structures, jobs, relationships, recognition, and how fragile that construction is. Failure doesn't ruin you, it removes everything false. There's a moment in everyone's life when they hit something that won't bend to effort, a rejection, a betrayal, a collapse of something that once felt certain. You try to fix it, explain it, outrun it. Then one day, you stop. You sit in the wreckage and realize, there's no going back. That moment, though it feels like defeat, is the first step toward maturity. Failure introduces you to limits, not as punishments, but as boundaries that define where real growth begins. Psychologically, failure is the recalibration of ego. It forces your brain to shift from fantasy to function. When everything goes right, your sense of control is inflated. You believe your outcomes reflect your worth. But when things fall apart despite your effort, you meet the truth of uncertainty. You begin to see that control is partial, that life moves with its own logic. That realization hurts, but it's the foundation of resilience. In a world obsessed with success stories, failure becomes taboo. We don't post it, we don't talk about it, we edit it out of our narratives. But without failure, there's no depth. People who've never failed tend to live with a subtle fragility, their sense of self depends on things continuing to work. They haven't yet met the part of themselves that can rebuild. That's why failure, in a paradoxical way, is a form of privilege. It gives you access to a version of strength that can't be developed through winning. Think of someone like Steve Jobs, who was famously fired from his own company. That humiliation forced him to re-examine his relationship with his work. It stripped him of prestige, but also of constraint. He later said that losing Apple was the best thing that happened to him. It freed him to create again with curiosity instead of pressure. Without that failure, he might have become a corporate figurehead, detached from innovation. The setback reconnected him to the essence of why he started. Or consider failure in a more personal sense. Someone goes through heartbreak, not the temporary kind, but the kind that leaves you hollow. You thought this was the person, the future, the story. Then it ends. That kind of emotional failure forces self-confrontation. You start questioning not just why it failed, but why you needed it so much. That's where you uncover dependency patterns, unhealed wounds, or the illusions you projected onto another person. Pain becomes a mirror. You start to rebuild not by chasing love again, but by learning to stabilize yourself first. Failure, when faced consciously, refines character. It strips entitlement and teaches patience. It turns idealism into realism without killing hope. It makes you careful with your ego and generous with others because you start to recognize that everyone's carrying invisible losses. The people who fail deeply are often the most grounded. They've tasted collapse and learned that life continues anyway. The privilege of failure also lies in what it teaches about detachment. When you've lost something you thought you couldn't live without, and you're still breathing, you realize how transient everything is. You start valuing moments over outcomes. You stop measuring worth by productivity or praise. You develop quiet gratitude for simple stability. That kind of shift doesn't come from success. Success often blinds you to it. There's another layer to failure, the emotional transformation it brings. At first, failure breeds shame. You feel exposed, lesser, behind. But shame only thrives in secrecy. The moment you face it head-on, it begins to dissolve. You start to see failure not as a personal defect but as part of being human. That shift transforms your relationship with yourself. You become kinder. You start giving yourself the same compassion you once reserved for others. And once you've given yourself that grace, you start giving it outwards. In truth, failure builds emotional immunity. Once you've been embarrassed publicly, rejected by people you trusted, or knocked down by circumstances beyond your control, you develop something deeper than confidence: composure. You stop fearing uncertainty because you've already survived it. You stop chasing perfection because you've seen what's left when perfection collapses: authenticity. But failure only becomes a privilege when you use it. Some people let it define them, others let it refine them. The difference lies in perspective. The victim of failure keeps replaying what went wrong. The student of failure studies the pattern and grows from it. Failure doesn't automatically teach, reflection does. You have to dissect it, sit with the discomfort, and let the truth emerge. One of the hardest lessons failure teaches is humility without self-hatred. You learn to admit what you didn't know, what you mishandled, or what you avoided. But you also learn to separate mistake from identity. You failed, yes, but you are not a failure. That distinction is liberation. It allows you to keep risking without fearing ruin. Because the real fear behind failure isn't losing, it's being seen as less. Once you stop fearing that, you become unstoppable. There's a quiet power in people who've made peace with their failures. They move differently, grounded, measured, patient. They don't overreact when things go wrong. They don't brag when things go right. They've learned the rhythm of loss and recovery. They know that everything is temporary, both the applause and the silence. That perspective makes them dangerous in the best way. They're unshaken by volatility. So when you fail, at love, at work, at life, don't just mourn the loss. Study it. Let it burn away the vanity, the ego, the illusion of control. Let it show you what's real. Because failure, when understood, gives you something no success can: depth. It gives you truth. It gives you yourself. That's the privilege of failure. It takes away everything that isn't you, and leaves behind what is.